If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be relaxing in my sunroom, enjoying a cup of lukewarm coffee, and sharing my story about my husband's driver with strangers online, I would have laughed out loud. I would have laughed and rolled my eyes, just like I used to when my sister talked about how life can bloom unexpectedly. But things have changed. My name is Elaine. I'm 62 years old, and I've been married to Richard for so long that we've stopped counting anniversaries and started measuring our time together by the vacations we've missed and the grandchildren we've welcomed. We're comfortable, financially, emotionally, and socially, maybe too comfortable. Richard has always been successful, perhaps a bit too focused on his work, even in retirement. He's traded boardrooms for golf courses, but he's still rarely home. That's where Jerome came into the picture. Our driver, hired more out of necessity than anything else. After Richard's knee surgery 2 years ago, it made sense to have someone on standby. Jerome has been driving for us for just over a year now. He's in his mid-40s, quiet, and never oversteps his boundaries. He has a certain way about him, polite but not stiff, with an old-fashioned dignity that's hard to find these days, the kind that makes you feel noticed without feeling watched. Our interactions were always routine. He'd open the car door, I'd nod politely, and we'd drive in silence or engage in polite small talk. Nothing remarkable happened until that afternoon in late October. The air had a coolness that crept into your sweater sleeves. I remember it clearly because I had just left the salon. It was one of those days when you feel a bit lighter, a bit younger, because someone else had taken the time to style your hair. I saw the car idling by the curb and Jerome standing outside, leaning slightly with one hand in his pocket. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, smiling as he opened the door. I smiled back and said, "Call me Elaine, please. Being called Mrs. Anything makes me feel older." He chuckled softly and nodded. "Elaine, it is." It was just a moment, but something shifted, like a curtain moved by a breeze you didn't know was there. We started talking more after that, not flirtatiously, but conversations with depth. He asked about books, music, and things Richard never bothered with anymore. And I found myself answering honestly, sometimes too honestly. A few weeks later, on the way back from the market, I felt exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained from feeling invisible. Jerome must have noticed. "Are you all right, Elaine?" he asked, his eyes still on the road. I sighed, looking out the window at the golden leaves falling. "Just a long day." He nodded. "You carry it well." I looked at him, puzzled. "Carry what?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror for just a second. "Everything you're going through." It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, like he saw me, like he was watching not to judge, but to understand. After that, things didn't change dramatically, but I became more aware of myself and of him, realizing how rare it is to feel truly known. One afternoon, a few weeks before Thanksgiving, Richard called to say he'd be flying out to a conference, one of those last-minute trips he always justified with just one more trip. I wasn't surprised. I was used to it, but it still hurt. Jerome pulled up for our usual drive to the museum board meeting I attend once a month. I slid into the back seat and, without thinking, sighed harder than I meant to. "Rough day?" he asked. "My husband's skipping Thanksgiving," I said before I could stop myself. Then I laughed, trying to make light of it. "He says he'll be back in time for dessert." Jerome didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Holidays should be about being present." There was that word again, present. We didn't say much for the rest of the ride, but when I got out of the car, he handed me a small paper bag. "Try this," he said. "Made it last night. Sweet potato pie. Family recipe." I blinked, surprised. "Jerome, I can't just take a slice." He interrupted gently. "You can tell me if it's any good next time." The pie was more than good. It tasted like childhood, comfort, and home. I found myself thinking about that pie the next morning when I saw him again, this time picking me up for a fundraiser. I told him it was better than any pie I'd ever had, including my mother's. He smiled but said nothing, just looked at me, really looked at me. The car became our sanctuary, a place where words mattered less than silences. Then came the evening I won't forget. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. A light drizzle kissed the windshield as we drove back from the charity dinner. My heels pinched, my earrings felt too heavy, and I felt every minute of my 62 years. Jerome reached over, turned on the seat warmer, and said, "You look beautiful tonight." It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. Quietly, not to flatter, but to affirm something he already knew to be true. I looked at him. "Thank you." We pulled into the driveway, the house lights glowing softly through the mist. I didn't move to get out. He turned to face me. "Are you okay, Elaine?" I said, "I don't know." We sat in the stillness, the soft tick of the engine and the distant hoot of an owl in the trees, the only sounds. Then he reached over slowly, gently, and placed his hand over mine. Just for a moment, warmth spread up my arm, through my chest, and into a part of me I thought had gone quiet long ago. There was no kiss, no dramatic music, just that hand, that moment, and it changed everything. I didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't guilt exactly, or confusion. It was something else, like my soul had been gently nudged awake after a long slumber, and it didn't quite know what to do with itself. Richard didn't call, not that I expected him to. He was in Phoenix or Dallas or one of those cities he never bothers to describe anymore. Just names on his itinerary, not stories or memories. The next morning was overcast, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. I wandered into the kitchen, still in my robe, poured my coffee, and stood by the window. The bird feeder was empty again. I made a mental note to refill it, even though I knew I wouldn't. Not today. Jerome's hand over mine lingered in my memory, not overpowering, just present. I told myself it was nothing, a comforting gesture, kindness, the sort of thing that would have gone unnoticed if it hadn't landed exactly where I'd been most alone. But all day, I kept catching myself smiling at nothing, and that scared me a little. I didn't see Jerome again until Friday. I could have asked him to take me to the store or the library or just about anywhere to force a conversation, but I didn't. I needed the space to think, to let the moment breathe. When he arrived that afternoon to drive me to the florist, everything felt quieter, not awkward or strained, just cautious, like we were both walking barefoot across new ground. "Elaine," he greeted, holding the door for me. "Hi," I said, climbing in. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, just the soft hum of the engine and the rain tapping gently on the roof. Finally, he said, "I hope I didn't cross a line the other night." His voice was low and steady. I looked over at him. "You didn't." He nodded once. "Good." That was it. No long explanations, no apologies. And I appreciated that more than I can explain, because the truth is, I didn't want it explained or analyzed. I just wanted it to be real. At the florist, I took longer than necessary, running my fingers over rose petals and eucalyptus stems like I was searching for something more than a centerpiece. When we got back in the car, Jerome opened my door again, but this time his fingers brushed my wrist lightly. I noticed, and so did he. I could have said something then about Richard, about how none of this made sense, but instead I asked, "Do you have family in town?" He nodded. "My sister, she teaches middle school. My mom, she's out in Decatur. That's not far." He smiled. "Far enough to make excuses, close enough to run out of them." I laughed, and it felt good, really good. We drove back in silence again, but it was different now. Like the silence was a conversation we were both part of. As we pulled up to the house, I didn't reach for the door. I sat there, hands in my lap. "Jerome," I said softly, "do you ever wonder what your life might have been if one moment had gone differently?" He turned to me, the engine still running. "All the time," he said. "But I don't think those moments are about changing everything. Sometimes they're about waking us up to what we've stopped noticing." That stayed with me long after he left. Thanksgiving came and went in a blur of cranberry sauce and carefully timed conversations. Richard flew in late that morning, golf bag slung over his shoulder like some kind of emotional armor. He kissed my cheek and asked what time dinner was. No apology, no explanation. We had friends and neighbors over. The grandkids called, and the turkey was a little dry. Richard fell asleep on the couch halfway through the football game, and I felt like I was watching my own life from outside the window. The next day, I called Jerome. "I don't need a ride," I said. "I just wondered if you were free for coffee." There was a pause. "I am," he said. We met at a quiet little place off Maplewood, the kind with mismatched mugs and music that sounded like something from my college days. He was already seated when I walked in, a book in one hand and a steaming cup in front of him. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said as I sat down. "Neither did I admitted. We talked for nearly 2 hours about music, yes, but also about loss and resilience, and the quiet way life shifts under your feet when you aren't looking. He listened the way most people don't anymore, not waiting to talk, not offering solutions, just listening. I realized somewhere between the third sip and the second refill that it wasn't about Jerome at all. It was about me. I had spent so many years tending to everyone else, my husband, my children, my garden, my calendar, that I had forgotten the sound of my own thoughts, forgotten what it meant to feel alive. When we stepped outside, the sky had cleared, The pavement glistened, and the air smelled like wet leaves and second chances. Jerome walked me to my car. "Thank you," I said, "for listening, for not rushing this." His eyes met mine, steady and warm. "Some things shouldn't be rushed," he said, "especially when they matter." I sat in my car for a long time after he left, watching the wind chase leaves across the parking lot. Something was changing, not in some scandalous or dramatic way, but in the quiet corner of my heart that had long since gone silent. And I was ready to listen to it again. It's funny how you can live in the same house, share the same last name, sleep in the same bed, and still feel like strangers. Richard had been home for nearly 2 weeks, and we were moving around each other like furniture, functional, present, but never truly touching. He'd leave early for the club, come home late, and ask if I'd seen where he left his cufflinks. I'd nod or point, and that would be the extent of it. There wasn't anger between us. No shouting, just silence, and not the comfortable kind. I started spending more time outside, walking the trail behind the house, breathing in the crisp December air, watching squirrels race like children across the fence line. There was a stillness in winter that matched what I felt inside. One afternoon, I passed the bench near the creek, the one Richard had installed years ago but never once sat on. I brushed off the frost with my gloved hand and sat down, curling into my coat like a shell. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Jerome. "Hope the cold's being kind to you today. I drove by the lake and thought of you. Felt like a quiet kind of day." It was simple, thoughtful, and it warmed me more than the scarf around my neck. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure how. Instead, I stared at that message, wondering how something so small could feel so significant. That evening, Richard came home with a bottle of wine and told me we'd been invited to the Donnies' Christmas party. I hadn't seen the Donnies in over a year. "Should be nice," he said. "Might be good for you to get out more." I raised an eyebrow. "You say that like I've been hiding under the porch." He looked confused. "I just meant you've seemed a little distant lately." I wanted to laugh. Distant. I wanted to ask him where he'd been when our son lost his job, or when I spent 3 nights crying quietly in the bathroom because I couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded. "Sure, let's go." The party was fine. The food was oversalted and underseasoned. The small talk was predictable. Grandkids, hip replacements, retirement homes in Arizona. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. And then I saw Jerome. He was there as a chauffeur, parked at the curb, waiting for one of the guests. I hadn't expected it. He hadn't mentioned it. Our eyes met through the window. He dipped his head slightly, acknowledging me, but nothing more. My heart fluttered in my chest. Something between surprise and something I couldn't quite name. I excused myself, stepped outside, pretending to take a phone call. He was standing by the car, hands in his coat pockets, face lifted toward the night sky. "Cold evening," I said softly as I approached. He turned, smiled gently. "It's the kind of cold that wakes you up." We stood there in the quiet, a hush between us that said more than words. "You look beautiful tonight," he said. I felt a blush rise in my cheeks. "You always say that." That's because it's always true. I looked down at my heels, suddenly aware of how silly they felt out here in the real world. This all feels like a dream sometimes. He stepped a little closer, not too close, just enough. Then I hope it's the kind you don't want to wake up from. That moment stretched like taffy, sweet, slow, and impossibly tender. And then a door opened behind us, voices spilled out, and the spell broke. I stepped back, adjusting my coat. I should get back. He nodded, but his eyes lingered. Back inside, I found Richard talking about interest rates with a man I barely recognized. He didn't ask where I'd gone or notice I was gone at all. Later that night, after we got home, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, washing off the carefully painted version of myself. Lipstick, blush, mascara, one by one, gone. And when I looked up again, I saw me, just me, lines, gray hair, the softened skin around my jawline, but also something I hadn't seen in a long time. A flicker of light in my eyes, something alive. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote in my journal, I don't know what this is, but I know it feels like truth. And truth, however inconvenient, is worth listening to. I didn't hear from Jerome for a few days. It was the holidays, and he was probably busy, or maybe he was giving me space. Either way, I thought about him more than I meant to. Christmas morning came quietly. Richard handed me a small box with a watch inside, expensive, elegant, impersonal. I thanked him. He nodded, then turned on the news. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the garden. Everything was brown and brittle, but the air was full of potential, of what could be. I called Jerome. I was just thinking about you, he said when he answered. We didn't make plans. We didn't need to. Some connections don't need appointments. They just need space to breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't restlessness. It was awakening. The days between Christmas and New Year's always feel suspended in time. There's a strange stillness that comes with the end of one year and the beginning of another, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to change. I didn't know what to expect when I saw Jerome again. I thought about him, yes, more than I should have, but I told myself it was a passing phase, a temporary connection, something that filled a hole I didn't even know was there. But life doesn't work like that, does it? You can't push away the things that matter. They find you. On the second morning of the new year, the phone rang. It was Jerome. Elaine, he said, his voice low, almost tentative. I need to tell you something. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what I was bracing for. You're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question, but I hoped I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he said, No, I'm not leaving. But I think you need to hear this from me, not anyone else. Go on, I whispered, my hands suddenly cold. I was standing by the window again, looking out at the barren garden, the stillness of the world outside reflecting my own quiet turmoil. I've been thinking about us, about what happened that night, and I can't ignore it anymore. I care about you, Elaine, more than I should. His words fell between us, like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew about myself, about us. I wasn't sure what to say or if I even had a right to say anything at all. I'd spent years making my peace with the way things were, with the silence, the absence, the quiet spaces that Richard and I had become so good at filling with nothing. And now this. I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but I was ready to listen. I care about you too, I said, my voice trembling a little. But I don't know what to do with that. What does it mean, Jerome? What does any of it mean? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breath, steady and slow. It means, he said, his voice warm and sure, that I'm not the person you've built your life around. But maybe, just maybe, I can help you remember who you are. A soft laugh escaped me, one of disbelief, but also relief. The kind of laugh you give when you realize you've been holding your breath for too long. I don't even know who I am anymore, I said, my throat tight. You're someone who's been waiting to wake up, he replied. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. There was no grand revelation, no sudden moment of clarity, just the quiet recognition that sometimes the things we need don't come with bells and whistles. Sometimes they come in whispers, in small, gentle realizations that lead us back to ourselves. Come meet me for coffee, he asked after a long pause. I glanced at the clock. It was a Tuesday morning. The world was still, and for the first time in a long time, I felt present. I'd like that, I said. The cafe where we met was small, an old building with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, a place that had been around longer than either of us. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee grounds. I ordered my usual black coffee with a dash of cream, and he handed me a cup of something steaming and spicy. A little too sweet for my taste, but it made me smile. We didn't talk much at first. We just sat there side by side, letting the silence fill the spaces between us. Eventually, I asked, "What do we do now?" He looked at me, his expression soft and thoughtful. We figure it out, together or apart. But we stop pretending we don't feel this. We stop pretending we don't need this. It was a quiet confession, one that didn't demand anything from me, just the recognition that something had shifted. I don't know if I'm ready for anything, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I've spent so many years convincing myself that I don't need anything more, that I'm fine. He smiled gently, reaching across the table to place his hand over mine. You are fine, Elaine, but maybe you're ready for something different, something more. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. This touch was enough. I felt it settle into my bones. Soft, steady, sure. We sat there for a long time, long enough that the early morning crowd thinned out and the light from the windows shifted from gray to gold. When we stood to leave, he hugged me, not the kind of hug that feels like goodbye, but the kind that feels like hello. Take care of yourself, Elaine, he said quietly, holding me a moment longer than necessary. I will, I whispered. The drive back home felt different. The car, the streets, even the house. It all felt new, as if the world had shifted ever so slightly on its axis. Richard was home when I walked in. He looked up from his paper and offered his usual smile. How was your day? Good, I said, my voice steady, but something else lingered behind the words. Good, he repeated as if testing the sound of it. Then he went back to reading as if everything were just the same. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what would become of Jerome, or of me, or of Richard. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I could see the quiet potential in the spaces between the moments. I could feel the weight of what I had learned about myself, about the things I had hidden, about the way life could surprise you when you let it. And that was enough.